Gloriana said by ThebeMoon. Chapter 78. Very interesting plan. This is the last official chapter, with only the epilogue remaining. Hermione and Draco both had plans for Wednesday morning. They hadn't discussed them, hadn't set up a schedule or anything, but it was fair to say they had plans. As Lila would say, very interesting plans. And those plans, it was also fair to say, did not include oversleeping until nearly 8 o'clock. Yes, they were both very tired, but Hermione's pre-dawn loop habits and those very interesting plans should have guaranteed an early morning. Instead, Hermione blinked herself awake in a sweet haze, enjoying the weight on her chest, a head of messy white blonde hair under her chin, and warm arms around her. Watery sunlight rippled through the room, and she bolted upright, knocking Draco back against the headboard. The storm had passed, and in November, morning sunlight only meant one thing. They were late. 7:52! Hermione wailed the final ooh of the two, hitting an almost impossibly high note. Draco groaned and rubbed the back of his head. Hermione scrambled out of bed, dragging the cream-colored coverlet with her. Then she stood in the middle of the room, too horrified to act further. "Draco!" she cried. "Do something!"
"Do what?"
he asked grumpily.
"Join you in making hysterical screeching noises? Half the castle knows you're in here with me now. Those soliding spells don't last forever, you know."
Hermione clapped a hand over her mouth, now even more horrified, and stared at Draco. He was stretched out naked on the coverless bed, now eyeing his erect self somewhat mournfully. He held her hand and tried to moderate her tone. "Draco," she repeated. He looked up at her hopefully, and she huffed. "There's no time for that."
"Are you sure?"
Draco patted the bed beside him. Hermione glanced at the silver-chased jade clock by his bed. 7:54! Draco sighed and gave up.
"Emmy?"
A loud crack echoed in the room, the elf instantly appearing in a cloud of lace with her tray.
"Maître Draco et Maîtresse Hermione,"
she cried.
"My heart is full of joy to see you enclosed together."
Hermione flushed and pulled the coverlet more tightly round herself. "I need to get to my room, Draco." Emmy eyed Draco curiously, then turned her gaze to Hermione.
"But I do not comprehend. Do you mean to leave Master Draco in such a state? There is always time for—"
"Emmy!" Hermione cried. Was this her life now? Was she really being reproached by a house elf for not having morning sex? Draco needs to get down to breakfast. He needs to be seen. The elf sighed.
"Anglaise."
She set her tray on the still cluttered dinner table, then snapped her fingers and the table and tray vanished.
"Then I shall apparate Mistress Hermione to her room."
"Thank you, Amy," Hermione said, snatching Draco's shirt and jumper off the armchair. Draco was sitting up now, feet on the floor, still shamelessly naked. Hermione approached him cautiously. "I'll see you at breakfast," she said, giving him a quick peck on the cheek and picking up her wand. He snaked an arm around her, and Hermione suddenly found herself on his lap, his lips on her throat. "Draco!" She squeaked and pulled away. She practically ran back to her position in the middle of the room, refusing to look at him. "All right, Emmy," she told the elf severely, and Emmy giggled and touched her arm, popping them instantly into Hermione's room. Ginny was standing on one foot in the center of the room, pulling on her tights, and nearly fell over in shock. "Ginny, this is Draco's house elf, Emmy," Hermione said. "Emmy, Ginevra Weasley."
"Mademoiselle Ginevra, it is an honor to meet you, one of La Maîtresse's friends,"
Emmy said, bowing. Ginny smiled kindly at Emmy, then looked Hermione over and snickered. Hermione looked at the mirror and groaned. Draco's shirt and jumper hung low past her hips, but gaped widely around the neck, clearly revealing multiple marks from her jaw on down, and on her hair was completely destroyed. "A rough night?" Ginny asked innocently. "I am not talking about this now," Hermione said, moving to the wardrobe for a pressed uniform. "Oh, just a few details. Ginny wheedled, abandoning the tights.
It was just Draco, right? Although, judging by your current state, perhaps he had a little help.
Ginevra, Molly, Weasley. Hermione dropped the skirt. It was just, Merlin, you're as bad as Luna. Ginny grinned.
Luna's convinced that Draco's sexually deviant.
Well, he needs to work up to it, Hermione snapped, picking up her toiletries bag. And for the record, that option is not.
Touché, Ginny said. I'd expect you'd be in a better mood on such a morning.
Très anglaise,
Hermione said sadly. Hermione jumped, startled. She'd forgotten the elf was there.
denying herself sex du matin, and Master Draco too.
The elf looked disapproving.
You're right, Hermione. That's very sad, Ginny said. There's always time for a nice blowjob.
Hermione's face lit up.
Exactement.
I'm leaving now, Hermione said. And so are you, Emmy, and thank you.
Oui, Mistress Hermione.
Hermione said dolefully. Hermione stumped off to the bathroom to prepare for the day. Ginny's peals of laughter still ringing in her ears. Obviously, she'd have to keep her roommate and Draco's elf far apart from now on. Draco had saved a place beside him at the Slytherin table, and Hermione fell onto the bench with a thump, feeling frazzled. Draco just sipped his morning tea, looking as pristine as ever. Hermione's work, Hermione darkly suspected. The Malfoy ring stood out starkly on his pale hand, and half the Slytherin table was staring at it. As for the rest of the hall, it looked like Hermione's hope that the school's vendetta against Draco would ease up overnight was entirely misplaced. She could hear murmurings about blood and Death Eaters. Sick and twisted appeared to be the general consensus about her and Draco's relationship. She tried not to listen, but it was hard. What with that pack of Ravenclaws talking loudly about Hermione's Journal of Conquests? Hermione gnawed on a dry scone, too depressed to even add jam. Luna was probably telling everyone how deviant she was. The Slytherin table looked no happier. Theo's face was dark, and Blaise actually narrowed his eyes in concern. The only ones unaffected were Pansy and Draco, the latter buttering his scone. McGonagall rose from her throne-like chair, and the hall fell silent to Hermione's relief.
Students,
the headmistress said,
please grant your attention for a very important announcement.
Hermione started, crushing the bit of scone in her hand. What would McGonagall do? Anything she said about Draco would only make things worse. Draco continued, buttering his scone like he was being graded on the pastry for neatness and thoroughness.
Mr. Macmillan,
McGonagall said. Hermione turned to look at the Hufflepuff table where Ernie stood, ears red. He cleared his throat.
Thank you, Headmistress McGonagall. Good morning, Hogwarts students. I'm sure you all look forward to another productive day of...
Mr. Macmillan,
McGonagall said. Ernie nodded.
Christmas is coming,
he said, as if his announcement was all that was needed for the holiday to occur.
And as part of our school efforts for inter-house unity...
Angry murmurs swelled. Everyone had it up to here with inter-house unity. Ernie raised his voice and continued.
And as part of these efforts, the school is hosting an inter-house unity secret holiday gift exchange.
Hermione's jaw dropped. A what?
As head boy, I have developed a comprehensive spell to ensure that each student receives the name of someone of a different gender and house, and in their own year, if possible.
Ernie went on. Ooh! Smiles and whispers spat through the hall with some girlish squealing. Hermione looked at the Ravenclaw table. Hedgar Podmore rolled her eyes, her expression clear. I had nothing to do with this.
The spending limit is 5 galleons,
Ernie continued.
And we all exchange our gifts at the holiday feast. In the spirit of Christmas fun, please keep the name you receive confidential.
He drew his wand and cast a spell. Scrolls began appearing on the students' plates. Hermione pulled a roll of parchment out of her tomatoes inside. Best to get it over with. Hopefully... What? The Melzer Robins? Devena's happy squeal practically shook the hall. The Gryffindor's significant look at the snake's table left no doubt whose name she had. Theo certainly understood immediately. The poor man almost cringed. The Slytherins had no compunction about breaking Ernie's rule of silence. Within minutes, the snakes had a little auction going with desirable names going to the highest bidder. Hermione sat open-mouthed as a Slytherin prefect called out names in drawling tones. Herbert, Carter, Padma Patil. Gold began trading hands, and Hermione glared at Draco as he turned over his scroll and bid for Percival. You shouldn't be trading, she hissed, and your name should be a different gender. A travesty of a boyfriend just winked and tossed a coin at the prefect, plucking his new scroll out of the air. I know just the gift, Draco said smugly. He'll love it. Hermione huffed and turned to Lena. I see you've kept your original name, told the young girl approvingly.
I have some very interesting ideas for Miss Astoria Greengrass,
Lena said. Wrong gender, Hermione sputtered. Wrong house.
Yes,
Lila said.
This activity has been poorly executed.
She tucked her scroll into her skirt pocket and began spooning up her oatmeal. Hermione looked over the hall again. Pandemonium had broken out as the students cheered and groaned and swapped. Unwary students who left their scrolls unattended risked having them switched by students unhappy with their name and willing to take a chance.
Miss Granger,
said a voice behind her. It was Rupert Pratt holding his small scroll.
Do you know a Percy Weasley? Is he a Ravenclaw?
What? Hermione squeaked, then tried to moderate her tone as the former beater flinched. Percy's a Gryffindor, Rupert, and he hasn't attended Hogwarts in years. Pratt's face fell.
Nuts. I paid 10 galleons for him.
That was the last straw. Hermione left the southern table and stalked over to Ernie. What do you think you're doing? She snapped, waving her tomato-smeared scroll in the head boy's face. I have to mail the Robins.
Like Merlin,
Ernie said, standing.
Could you trade with me?
Ernie!
Please,
Ernie begged.
I have Goyle and no one else will take him.
Hermione huffed. Fine, she said, in the spirit of inter-house unity. They traded scrolls. This gift exchange was a ridiculous idea.
Well, Neville said.
Neville? Hermione looked over at the Gryffindor table, where Neville seemed a little unnerved by the uproar around him. Interesting. Then she turned to the Slytherin table, and there was Pansy, looking smug.
Hey, Annie,
Anna Abbott said, holding up her scroll.
Here's Marcus Fix. Do you think he'd like a few bars of my homemade soap?
Ron and Hermione stared at her, unable to speak.
Students,
McGonagall's voice rang out.
You have returned to your places in good order.
Hermione returned to the Slytherin table and sat beside Pansy. Why, Pansy? He asked in a low voice. Why a gift exchange? It was necessary, Pansy said, admiring a sapphire bracelet peeping out from under her shirt cuff.
The school needed a distraction to take their minds off Draco.
Did you sabotage the spell? Hermione asked.
No need.
Pansy cast Ernie a contemptuous glance.
I knew I could count on our head puff to bollocks it up. Never thought it was a lovely idea.
Hermione almost groaned. Neville was so upright and trustworthy. Who knew how many diabolical schemes Pansy could execute through him? It will never work, she told the Slytherin witch. People hate Draco now. You won't throw them off so easily.
Just wait.
Pansy smirked and transformed her sapphire bracelet to an emerald one with a tap of her wand. Hermione didn't have to wait long. By lunch, it was as if there had never been any blood messages. Draco wasn't hexed once. Even Justin was too busy trying to track down his ex-girlfriend's scroll to harass anyone. Dennis Creevy did his best to foment more hatred, and Draco was the subject of many glares at lunch. But then a rumor swept the castle, likely started by Pansy. Some names had been assigned more than once. That meant some students might not get gifts at all, and paranoia ran rampant as students tried to confirm that somebody had their name. Draco disappeared after lunch and turned up late to double her body, looking especially smug. But Hermione had no chance to question him since McGonagall summoned them both to her office immediately after class. First, the headmistress requested that Draco remain in the castle until holiday break. Then she updated them about Celeste Rosier. Despite the best efforts of the healers and McGonagall herself, the Death Eater would likely remain a pygmy puff for the rest of her days.
Professor Hagrid has placed Sally in a nice coop behind the pumpkin patch,
the headmistress said, eyes gleaming behind her spectacles.
I plan to visit often.
Finally, McGonagall delivered a formal reprimand to Hermione for casting an illegal transfiguration. Then she gave Hermione an outstanding newt score in the subject, which meant Hermione wouldn't have to sit the transfiguration exams. Hermione beamed. Draco rolled his eyes. Once back on the third floor beside the gargoyle, Hermione suggested that they take a walk in the castle's main courtyard. The late afternoon sun still shone brightly in the courtyard's high walls, which sheltered them from the cold wind. Draco agreed, and she ran up to the Gryffindor tower to grab her scarf, mittens, and had just finished Gryffindor knit cap. It was a practice cap. She was knitting more as Christmas presents, and while the red and gold lines were a bit crooked and the pom-pom entirely too big, she was pleased with the result. Draco resplendent in a green velvet-lined black cloak, silk green scarf, and black leather gloves, raised an eyebrow when Hermione met him in the entrance hall. "I know," she huffed. "Go ahead, tell me I look ridiculous."
"You look completely ridiculous,"
Draco answered with conviction, then slid an arm around her and pulled her closer.
"And the doorbell."
He kissed her thoroughly, then tucked the cap over her eyes before stepping back. "Draco!" Hermione said, flushing as she straightened her cap. Nearby students stared, but nobody threatened Draco or shouted, "Death Eater whore!" That pansy might be onto something. The couple discovered quickly that they weren't the only ones eager for a breath of fresh air. Students were thick on the courtyard's wide, grassy expanse, divided into quarters by wide-flagged paths that led to a large astronomy model in the center. The iron model was Copernican, not Ptolemaic, Hermione noted with approval. Draco had small patience for crowds and would have retreated immediately if Hermione had noticed that the yard's northwest quadrant was nearly empty. He led him through clusters of shivering students towards the clearing. Bloom and Pratt looked especially cold. Maybe they would like some nice knit cap. They quickly discovered the reason for the empty space. The squeaky mice were playing under a large Burnham oak tree, shrieking wildly and jumping into piles of yellow leaves. A few of the first years were shoving Bertie under a particularly large pile, but abandoned the game immediately when they saw Draco and Hermione.
"Miss Granger, Mr. Malfoy!"
the mice shouted. Their chubby faces were red with cold and excitement. Lila looked as flushed and dishevelled as the rest of them, with large golden leaves stuck in her dark hair. Hermione's attention, however, was caught by Percival, who wore a very familiar badge, round and black with bright green letters flashing. "Potter stinks." She turned to Scarlet Draco, but Layla beat her to it.
"I'm surprised at you, Mr. Malfoy.
The girl said severely.
Aura Potter is very nice and brave."
Her cheeks reddened further. Draco smirked. "Just a bit of Christmas fun." Percival struck a pose.
"Miss Granger, Mr. Malfoy."
Bertie had finally struggled out of the leaf pile, an agitated cupcake hopping on his shoulder.
"Got you off a CR detention on Saturday. I'm sure Professor Hagrid will mind."
"Professor Hagrid gave you lot detention?" Hermione was surprised. "What did you do?"
"We wanted to play with his new pygmy puff. It's so big and fluffy."
Hermione exchanged a horrified look with Draco. "What?"
"Professor Hagrid put it in with the new chicks."
Lila piped up.
"He let us watch and—"
"Oh, I thought those stumpy chicks were going to snack on that puff."
Percival interrupted loudly. Lila frowned at him, and the black-haired boy grinned and thrust out his chest. Potter stinks flashed merrily. "What happened?" Hermione asked.
"The puff just looked at the chicks and flapped its wings. And the chicks started screeching and ran into their nest.
We came back later and they were still hiding,"
Percival said.
"They won't come out."
"The chicks won't eat either,"
Imogen said.
We tried to give them beef tips.
Hermione and Draco exchanged another horrified look.
Did you lot go into that coop? Draco asked sternly.
I wanted to feed the chicks,
Imogen said,
and play with the puff.
It's a very interesting puff,
Nina said.
But Professor Hagrid caught us.
Bertie said.
You lot are not to go anywhere near that coop, Draco ordered. Those chicks are dangerous, and so is the puff.
That's what Professor Hagrid said.
He wants us to clean out the Sastra stables.
It stinks in there.
Well, you know all about stinking, Percival.
Lila snapped.
Can we write sentences with you instead, Mr. Malfoy? Miss Granger?
Imogen asked.
Please?
Certainly not,
Draco said.
You will clean those stables without complaint, and furthermore...
Draco began ranting about monsters and loony gamekeepers, and the mice listened in mutinous silence. Hermione rolled her eyes. She'd already heard the lecture on the Hogsmeade platform. She stealthily drew her wand, catching Lena's eye, and Layla casually shifted to block Draco's view of Percival. Hermione stepped away from Draco and muttered under her breath, licking her wand tip towards Percival. Then she moved back to Draco, laying her hand on his arm. "Draco, that's enough," she said. "I'm sure they all understand." Hermione stood on tiptoe to whisper in his ear. "I'll ward the coop." Lila tugged on Percival's robe, prompting Percival to turn away from Draco to glare at her. The other mice began to giggle. "Let's go," Hermione whispered to Draco. He trailed her hand down his arm. "It won't take long, and maybe after dinner. The room of requirement." Draco brightened. The Slytherin seemed to think he was owed something after the disaster of a morning, and Hermione was refusing to return to his bedroom on a school night. He fixed the squeaky mice with a stern look.
"All right, remember what I said."
Draco stalked off, and Hermione followed meekly, but she couldn't resist a final look back at the squeaky mice, who stood around grinning at Percival's badge, which now flashed, "Do your homework." Warding the Stymphalian chick's coop was easy enough, although Hermione couldn't help quivering a bit under Celeste's gaze. Who knew a pygmy puff could have such cold eyes? Draco held his wand on the former Death Eater, while Hermione cast the ward, allowing only Hagrid themselves and McGonagall to enter the coop. She also created a partition between the puff and the nest, so the chicks could relax and eat their beef tips. After dinner, Hermione and Draco headed to the room of requirement, which now had the strength to provide a simple bed with a thick grey quilt. "I'm not breaking curfew tonight," Hermione warned, hands on her hips.
"We'll see about that,"
Draco said. He was all business tonight, unbuckling his belt and stripping down to his black silk boxers. "Draco," Hermione began. The wizard was stretched out on the bed now, propping himself up with one elbow, and she trailed off, distracted by his long form. Draco's hand brushed the quilt before him, a silent and irresistible invitation. Hermione never remembered walking to the bed. She only knew she was there, standing with her knees against the quilt, looking down at those shining eyes. "Draco, you can't just demand I break."
"Watch me, Hermione,"
Draco said with a smile.
"You like to watch me, don't you? You'll watch me do many things tonight."
His eyes glittered in a way that sent shivers up her spine. Hermione swallowed but said nothing, just waited. He wasn't sure what she was waiting for, but Draco would know.
"Take off your clothes, Hermione,"
Draco said softly. The moment stretched thin, caught between two equal wills, until Hermione smiled. For the past harrowing weeks, Draco had been trapped by circumstances, his fate and the fate of his family in the balance. Now he felt a bit more in control, and being a Malfoy and a Slytherin, he wanted to demonstrate it. At least for tonight. Holding his gaze, Hermione took 2 steps backward, unraveling her tie and unbuttoning her uniform shirt to reveal a red bra. Draco watched attentively, but his self-satisfied smirk faded as she cast aside her bra and stepped out of her knickers. The windowless room was a bit dark, and Hermione wiggled her fingers in a non-verbal wordless spell. A single lamp suddenly blazed to life, casting its golden light on her bare body. Draco sat up, eyes wide. He didn't move a muscle as Hermione moved to kneel on the bed, then bent over to kiss him. He responded instantly, pushing her down on the quilt and kissing her deeply, and his hands were everywhere. Hermione's own hands ran over his chest, those thin scars and nearly invisible hair. Draco pulled away and hovered over her, the lamplight shining on his face, or perhaps reflecting an inner brightness as he looked at her. His warm sunshine smell surrounded her, layered with rich cologne. "Tell me you love me." His voice was almost impossibly deep. "I love you," she whispered. "Again." "I love you," he said more strongly. They were both cold now, as surely as if they wore matching chains of stars. Draco's mouth was on hers, his hands on her throat, his body trapping her. There was little darkness now, just a slight edge, the tiny flecks of his fingers. His lips moved to her ear. "I love you, Hermione Granger. Love you. Love you." He repeated it like a mantra, moving against her with clear intent. Hermione's eyes set shut and she moaned. His hands left her throat to side downward. She was soaked already from that touch of darkness, and she heard Draco chuckle lightly when he discovered that. His mouth moved to follow Hermione's fingers in his hair, and at the touch of his tongue she spasmed, biting down a scream. Soon she was falling apart, covered in a sheen of sweat, and he hadn't even entered her. "Please, Draco," she moaned. "I can't wait any more. Please." "I like it when you're back, Granger," said that smug voice from Potions, and she almost came again. He was getting a little hysterical now, pulling on his hair. It had to hurt him, but his voice was only slightly wrecked. "Open your eyes and watch Draco Malfoy fuck you." She obeyed, expecting to see dark Draco, but his eyes were bright and his smile open, and she couldn't help smiling back. "Control freak," she managed to gasp, and his smile widened as he thrust into her until she screamed. Draco's face was flushed with determination, and she learned why when he pulled out and flipped her over. "Hands and knees, Hermione," he said in her ear, and his voice was agonized. He wasn't controlling her limbs very well, but he helped her, and when he entered her again she squeezed her eyes shut and let her nerves collapse as he continued, until he finally came with a shattering groan and they fell bonelessly on the bed. She didn't know how long they lay there in a silent room, only their breath to be heard. Had no idea what time it was and didn't care. Another point to Slytherin. Draco stretched with a soft moan and picked up his wand, probably for a quick cleaning spell, when he froze. I never... He swallowed. I never took cast... His grey eyes were wide, tinged with a little fear. "It's all right," she panted. "I take a muggle pill." "A what?" Draco blinked. "What's a pill?" "Muggle medicine," Hermione grinned. "What are they teaching you in muggle studies?" "Vacuum cleaners today." Draco was still nervous. "They sound terrifying." He balanced on one elbow, looking down at her. "What is this pill? Is it safe? Why didn't you tell me?" He brushed his sweaty, slightly curled fringe from his forehead and watched it fall back again. "It's all right, trust me." Draco nodded, still a bit doubtful. "You understand, if anything comes of this, you and I will." "Shh." Hermione put her fingers on his lips. "We don't need to talk about that now." He visibly relaxed and waved his wand, and Hermione felt the soft coolness of his cleaning spell. She shivered, and Draco immediately tucked them both under the quilt. "Don't worry, I'll get you back to your tower," he murmured. Hermione snorted lightly, like she needed any help. Draco was stroking her hair, running a finger over the Gloriana pin, still tucked behind her ear. His other hand lay on her breast, and she felt the cool onyx of his family ring. Apertus sum. "I still can't believe you changed the motto," she said, stroking the dragons with her finger. He thought back to the scene in the charms classroom when she forced Draco to turn out his pockets. She hadn't dared touch the ring then, could almost feel its malevolent presence. Draco sighed. "It wasn't easy," he began. "I began trying after Mother's arrest.
I didn't see how I could ever have you again, but no matter what, I was determined to change the motto."
His hand stroked her breast.
"But the ring kept switching it back to Sanctimonia Vincent Semper."
"What made you go to Professor Bluebell?" He shrugged.
"She seemed knowledgeable, so I talked to her yesterday after Dada."
He rolled over on his back, one hand behind his head. "What will your parents say?"
"Doesn't matter."
His jaw was set.
"I'm the head of the family, and I make the decisions."
"Did the Crest's motto change and everything?" Hermione asked, remembering the glowing objects in his room. "Carpets, banners, silver toothbrush holders." He looked amused.
"Yes, the signet ring sets the seal. Bluebell and I knew we'd likely succeeded when grandfather's cufflinks glowed, but I didn't know for sure until I put on the ring."
His smile widened.
"Emir's probably embroidering the new motto onto linens as we speak."
"You should free her," Hermione said sternly. Lacy towels were still towels.
"You're welcome to try,"
Draco said, his thumb rubbing her nipple. Followed it up with his lips, and Hermione moaned. "Curfew," she gasped. "There's no time."
"There's always time."
Draco began whispering all the things there was surely time for.
"Trust me."
So Hermione did. Draco was true to his word, checking the time himself, dressing without argument, and escorting her up multiple staircases to the Gryffindor Tower before curfew. They passed jabbering groups of students, but no threats or snarls, just,
"Lydia swears she has Ogden's name, but I know she's lying. I saw the—"
"Frank has Polly, can you believe it? He thinks she'll—"
"I can't find that Marcus Fix anywhere. Do you think he'd like knitted snowman socks?"
Draco sneered at the chatter, but Hermione was only relieved. Although Neville was likely to take a dim view at being used in such a way. Oh well, that's a Parkinson problem. With 10 minutes left before curfew, they stood in the corridor out of earshot of the fat lady, discussing possible weekend plans since Chateau de Malfoy was out of the question.
"You packed that little pink bag anyway," Draco ordered. "Tell Ginevra you'll be spending the weekend in the dungeons."
"I can't," Hermione said. "I promised I'd have dinner on Saturday with her and the Harpies." She grinned. "I think they'd rather have you, though."
"Not a chance."
His finger traced her throat.
"Very well. I'll release you Saturday night, but come back to me afterwards."
He gave her that open look.
"Please."
"All right," Hermione said, resigned to total scandal. "You are truly a corrupting influence." Draco just chuckled and twined one of her rampant curls around his finger.
"Oh, my sweet, innocent Hermione,"
he murmured. His breath was hot in her ear.
"I haven't even begun to corrupt you yet."
The end. Next up, Epilogue. Thank you for listening to this chapter of the Gloriana set by ThebeMoon. If you'd like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or AO3.